Well, here we are. A bit of a turning point in the church year, and also a bit of a turning point in our community. As I mentioned earlier, in the church year, we have just completed the season of Epiphany, the season of light, the season of revelation, revealing Jesus, who Jesus is, and how Jesus is present in our world. And next Wednesday, we begin the season of Lent, these 40 days that are set aside in the church calendar that lead us up to Jesus' death and resurrection. Next Wednesday, we gather, we have ashes marked on our forehead. As for our community, it's somewhat maybe not definitely a big major turning point, but a turning point nonetheless. We have new leaders who have been elected to our council, and this week we have our first council meeting and our first all-day retreat. As I mentioned earlier, today and Sunday we celebrate and recognize and remember Jesus' transfiguration. Transfigure. A word that we don't use very often in our everyday language. And I'll be honest, I'm trying to find a difference between transfigure and transform. For both words mean to change the appearance of visibly. But I digress. Last week we left with the Sermon on the Mount. And between chapter 5 and today's chapter 17, Jesus had been preaching and teaching, healing, feeding thousands of people. He was healing children and he was walking on water. And the disciples were with him during all of this time. Then we have Jesus and the three disciples climb this mountain. They're at the top of the mountain. Jesus' appearance changes. And the disciples witness this change along with seeing Moses and Elijah. And they hear a voice from heaven. Now, this voice from heaven, these words may sound a bit familiar. In Matthew 3, we heard some of those words from heaven when Jesus was baptized. Now, on this mountaintop, the disciples had been following Jesus. They've heard his teachings. They've seen him heal people. And they have this voice that reminds them who Jesus is. Jesus is God's Son, just in case they forgot. And God adds 3 more words. This is my Son, the beloved. Listen to him. Now keep in mind, the disciples had learned and know about Jewish law and the prophets and the teachers. They know who Moses is. They know who Elijah is. Yet God's 3 words, listen to him, suggest that Jesus is either of higher status than Moses and Elijah, or God knows the disciples. God knows the disciples have messed up. And God knows the disciples will mess up. And so God is laying the groundwork for what Jesus says next. Jesus touches the disciples and says, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. The mountaintop is this turning point. Jesus had been ministering throughout the countryside, and he's now turning towards Jerusalem. He's ready to walk down this road to the cross. And the disciples have a decision to make. Are they going to follow him? Are they going to join him on this new leg of this journey? Or won't they? I'm going to show a video. Last year, council looked at different sections of the book called Shift. This book had us exploring different ways in which society has changed throughout the decades, and really how the church has such a different place, and it holds a different place in society, and especially in American culture. Do you want to hit the video?
I go to church, or I am the church. I am a member of the church, or I'm a disciple of Jesus Christ. We are the members who gather as this church, or we are the disciples who gather as this church. Language is powerful. Language forms us. It can form our very identity by the way we describe who we are. The word member originally was a very good, healthy, biblical word that describes our relationships with God and one another. It's just that over time it has picked up some baggage along the way to mean something different than how we use it in our faith communities. We are members of many different organizations and institutions, and sometimes we renew our memberships each year, and other times we let them go. Membership comes and goes. It's transient. But when it comes to being a disciple, we are disciples all the time, 24/7. This is part of who we are. It's not that we go to church, it's that we are the church. Perhaps this story will illustrate. I was with the church talking about the shift, and they told me the story about a young family who had become part of their faith community. This family had no Christian background at all. And so they became a part of the church, and in the fall they filled out their pledge card like others do and turned this in, and they were happy to do so. But in the winter and spring, they started missing this family. They were not participating in the church like they were. So one of the disciples in that congregation called the family on the phone, and the woman answered the phone, and she expressed thanks for the call and said they had been struggling because one of them had lost their job and their finances were tight. And she made this statement: since we're not able to pay our membership dues to the church, we figured we shouldn't take up the services of the church. So in their minds, they were being responsible participants as members of this organization. This church was able to share with them, this is not what we mean by membership, that it's something deeper and more significant than this. But it was a great illustration of how people in our culture understand membership. I am a member of this church. I am a disciple of Jesus Christ who joins together with this community of faith. Let's make the shift from member to disciple. I don't know about you, but there's no way I want to miss out on this robust move from member identity to disciple identity through Jesus Christ our Lord.
I wanted to show this video. Some of you may have seen it already. And I wanted to show it again because it lends to an example of our language in the church is changing. And because when we think of the progress that we have made, when we think like Peter, that we have gotten to this place, we are reminded that our journey of faith and our journey to faith is not yet over. We are reminded of this mountaintop experience, and we are reminded to not be afraid. There is much more to Jesus than we allow ourselves to imagine. And like any experience of the divine, if you think of the burning bush which was not consumed, the still small voice, the pillar of fire, these are events that are shrouded in mystery. when we encounter the divine, when we have these you had to be there type of moments. And in this text, even Peter, John, and James, the meaning of what it is that happened eludes them. They come back down the mountain and they aren't quite sure and not quite knowing exactly what had just occurred up there on that mountaintop. On this day, we, like the disciples, we are invited to remember all that we have come to believe about Jesus, all that we have come to believe about Christ's church and about this community of Norway Grove. And at the same time, we are asked to allow Jesus to transform those beliefs and to reshape them. And for that we say, thanks be to God. Amen.